Your Honor, my sister has never been the same since she came back. She thinks she's a federal agent. She thinks people are watching the house. Before these delusions cost her everything she has left, please, let me take control of my sister's accounts." The man who said that was standing 12 feet away from me. He was wearing a vest with a unit patch on the left breast. 3rd Infantry Division. The blue patch, the dagger, the 3 diagonal stripes. He'd worn it for 13 years. Wore it to breakfast. Wore it to church. Wore it standing at attention at the Cranfield High School football field every Veterans Day while the town applauded. He served in that division for 41 days. I'm Emily Callahan, 39 years old, and the man who just stood up and asked a court to declare me legally incompetent is my own brother. In the front row, my sister-in-law sat straight-backed with her hands in her lap. Julie. She wasn't gloating. She didn't look over at me. She just sat there with the face of a woman watching a family tragedy she believed every word of. That was the worst part. Julie wasn't lying. She'd signed a 4-page sworn affidavit about my episodes, and she believed every line she wrote because for 13 years the man she slept next to had been telling her. I sat still. Both hands flat on the table. I didn't object. I didn't shake my head. I didn't even blink faster than normal, because there was one thing I knew that nobody else in that room did. That morning I sat in that courtroom for 30 minutes watching my brother dismantle my life in a very convincing tremor of a voice. And I had no idea that 1 floor below in the hallway by the vending machine, 2 men in suits were waiting for an elevator. They weren't there for me. If you've ever had to sit still and listen to your own family describe a version of you that you don't recognize, then you understand the chair I was sitting in. Do me a favor and hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. I want to know how many of us are out there. Courtroom 2, Sangamon County Circuit Court, Springfield, Illinois. It smelled like lemon floor cleaner, hot printer paper, and rain steaming off wool coats draped over the backs of the benches. My brother's lawyer was named Gil Ferraro. His office sat in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pet supply store. He did wills and drunk driving cases. His suit was not expensive. His tie had a small stain near the knot. I knew what that told me. My brother didn't have any money. Ferraro opened a 3-ring binder. The clasp snapped open. A small metal crack that carried across the room louder than it should have. He turned to Exhibit 7 and held it up for the judge. And my heart stopped. It was a postcard. A photocopy. Black and white. But I recognized it instantly, from 12 feet away, under fluorescent light, after 18 years. I recognized the handwriting. My father's handwriting leaned right too hard, like it was trying to escape the margin. He capitalized the first letter of every noun regardless of grammar because he'd learned a trade instead of going to college, and he thought that was how you made something formal. He punctuated with dashes when he wasn't sure what to use. Ferraro read the card to the court, and the voice of a man reading something sacred. Rained 4 days straight. Fix the pump on tank 3 again. Same gasket. Gas is up to 311. Dad? Your Honor, Ferraro said. This is one of many letters my client's father sent him during his deployment to Iraq. We submit it to establish that my client understands the cost of military service, and that his action today comes from love, not from interest. In the front row, Julie touched the corner of her eye, and I sat there looking at the blown-up photocopy on the screen, and I saw it. Upper right corner. The postmark was still there. Round, smudged, dated. And below the postmark where 3 lines of address should have been, there was white space, a clean white rectangle sitting slightly crooked against the ruled line. He had whited out my name. My father's name was Ray Callahan. He ran the water treatment plant for the town of Cranfield, Illinois for 31 years. 9,000 people. 1 traffic light. 1 diner. My father's job was to make sure 9,000 people could turn on a faucet and not die. He did it for 31 years, and nobody in that town ever thought about him once, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He smelled like lava soap. The gray pumice bar working men used to scrub oil out from under their nails. That smell is in the kitchen drawer at my house. It's still there. My father didn't talk much. Not the cold kind of silence, not the punishing kind. He just didn't see a reason to speak when there wasn't anything that needed saying. He could sit next to you on a porch for 40 minutes and it wasn't uncomfortable at all. My mother was the opposite. Rosalind Callahan was the secretary at Cranfield Presbyterian for 22 years, and she knew everybody's business inside a 20-mile radius. She loved us. Both of us. She just loved one of them in a way that came easier. Daniel was 5 years older. He was handsome. He was funny. He was the kind of person who walked into a room and the room adjusted itself slightly around him. He played cornerback for the high school team and he wasn't very good. But he was the kind of player coaches liked, and that's a talent of its own. I was the one at the kitchen table doing homework while everybody watched TV in the living room. In 2004, Daniel enlisted. The whole town knew. My mother put it in the church bulletin. There was a party in the backyard. Mrs. Whitcomb made a cake. Somebody staked little flags all the way up the driveway. 41 days later, he came home. I don't know what happened at Fort Benning. I was 17. Nobody told me. All I know is the phone rang at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, and my father drove away and he came back at 8 that night with Daniel in the passenger seat. And Daniel was wearing the same clothes he'd left in. Nobody took the flags down. They sat there 3 weeks until the rain rotted them apart. My mother told the church it was a knee injury. Nobody in my family ever talked about those 41 days again. It became a room in the house we had closed the door on. June of 2005, I graduated high school. August, I enlisted. I didn't tell anybody until the paperwork was signed. I handed the form to my mother at the kitchen table. She read it. She set it down. She said, "What are you doing this for, Emily?" Not angry, just tired, like I'd spilled something on the carpet. "I think I can do it." Your brother thought that too. She got up and washed the dishes, and that was the entire conversation. My father drove me to the bus station in Springfield in September. Dark blue F-150 in '89, the kind of truck where you had to kick the door to get it shut. Cloth seats. Lava soap and cold coffee in a thermos. We drove 40 minutes without saying anything. That was normal with my dad. It didn't bother me. When he pulled into the lot, he shut the engine off. We sat there. The engine ticked as it cooled. Then he said, "I don't care what you do for a living." I turned and looked at him. "I care whether you can say your own name without swallowing first." Then he opened his door and went around back for my bag. And that was it. He didn't hug me. He handed me the bag, nodded once, and drove home. I've carried that sentence for 21 years. I've never told anybody, not even my brother. Especially not my brother. Remember that. We're coming back to this truck. I served 8 years. Army. Got out a sergeant. I'm not going to tell you about medals. I'm not going to tell you where I keep them. This channel has enough videos about that already, and my father would have made a face. What I'll tell you is 2 names. The first one is FOB Warhorse. Forward Operating Base Warhorse outside Bakaba, Diyala Province, Iraq. I landed there June 11, 2007. I left in September of 2008. The second one is a PO, AE 09392. That's a zip code. Army Post Office, Europe, which is what the military calls everything east of the Atlantic, including the desert. If you wanted to send me something during those 15 months, you wrote that on an envelope, dropped it in a mailbox in Illinois, and the United States Postal Service carried it halfway around the world for you at the price of a domestic stamp. My father knew that. And my father, a man who had never written anyone a letter in his life, started sending postcards, 1 a week. He never missed a week. They were the cheapest postcards that exist, the kind that spin on the squeaky wire rack by the register at the Casey's General Store out on Route 4. 39 cents. A picture of the Cranfield Water Tower, a picture of a cornfield, a picture of the highway for reasons unclear, and there was nothing in them. Genuinely nothing. 6 inches of snow. Town plow broke down for the 2nd time. Dad. Cardinals have lost 9 straight. Thinking about switching to the Cubs. Kai-ding. Dad. Your mother repainted the living room. The color is called oatmeal. It looks like oatmeal. Dad. 47 of them. I read every one about 20 times. I taped them to the wall of my container with 100-mile-an-hour tape. By the time the 47th one came, I was out of room. There's one thing you need to know about those cards. My father never wrote my name in the message. No dear Emily, no sweetheart, No, I miss you. Nothing. He wasn't that man, and I think if he'd tried, he wouldn't have been able to send any of them at all. My name was in exactly one place on each card, the address line. Sergeant E. Callahan, FOB Warhorse, APO AE09392. Back of the card, right side, under the stamp. That was the only place those 47 postcards knew who they belonged to. When Daniel made a joke about them, and he did, at the Thanksgiving table in 2009 when I was home on leave, he said, "He sends you the weather report? 8,000 miles to tell you the price of gas?" The table laughed. My mother laughed. I laughed. My dad didn't laugh. My dad didn't laugh. My dad kept carving the turkey. I think about that moment a lot, because now I know that by then Daniel had already seen them. He'd already held them in his hands. He just hadn't figured out what to do with them yet. I came home in August of 2013. No party, no flags. I didn't tell anybody the date. I took a cab from the Springfield station out to Cranfield. $42. The driver asked where I was coming back from. I said, work trip. My mother was cooking. She looked up and said, "Oh, you're back?" Then she asked if I was staying for dinner. 8 years. My father came out to the porch. He looked at me for about 4 seconds. Then he nodded once, went inside, and came back out with a beer for me. He didn't say anything. It's the most expensive nod I've ever received in my life. I didn't have a plan. I was 26 years old, with a duffel bag and a skills assessment that said I was good at reading paperwork and bad at quitting. There's a veterans hiring preference program for federal agencies. I applied to 3. 1 called back. The Office of Inspector General, United States Department of Veterans Affairs, Criminal Investigations Division. If you've never heard of it, I don't blame you. We're the people who investigate when somebody steals from veterans, or, more often, when somebody pretends to be one in order to steal. That was my job. For 13 years. That was my precise, specific area of expertise. Hold that thought. November of 2013, 3 months after I started, my brother filed a disability claim. Post-traumatic stress disorder. 70% rating raised to 100% in 2016. $4,100 a month. Tax-free. For life. In the claim, he stated that he had been deployed to Diyala Province, Iraq from February of 2007 to March of 2008. He named the unit. He named the base. FOB Warhorse. My brother didn't invent a war. He moved into mine. You're wondering how that got through. That's the right question. It's the first question anybody asks. And the answer is the thing that keeps me up more than the rest of this story. His name was Wendell Prokop. People called him Del. In 2013, Del Prokop was a claims examiner at the Regional Processing Center. He's 66 by the time you meet him in this story. But that year he was 53, and that year there was a thing called the backlog. I'm not going to explain it with jargon. I'll give you the number. 400 files a month. 1 man. Each file runs 30 to 200 pages. Each file is a human being. And Dell's supervisor had a whiteboard with a number on it, and that number had to go down. So Dell did what people do when you give them an impossible workload and a metric. He found a shortcut. There's a box on the form. Military service verification. He was supposed to pull the record from the archive system, match the dates, match the unit. That takes about 40 minutes a file. Or he could look at the supporting documents the claimant provided himself, and if it looked fine, he could check the box. That takes 4 minutes. 400 files a month. You do the math. April of 2015, I was assigned to review a random batch. Routine work. Quality control. 40 files, machine selected, Midwest region, file number 22. Callahan, Daniel R. I sat in my cubicle on the 3rd floor of the federal building in Springfield, and I read 13 pages, and I felt nothing at all. That's the strangest part. I kept expecting to feel something. Rage. Shock. Something. I just felt very tired. Because I knew immediately, not after an investigation, not after pulling records. Immediately, on the 4th line of the 2nd page, when I read the word Warhorse, nobody in my family knew that base name except me. Because it was on the back of 47 postcards. This is the part where, if this were a movie, I'd stand up and walk into my boss's office. I didn't do that. I did what the regulation told me to do. There's a document called a Memorandum of Recusal. 3 paragraphs. You state the case, you state the relationship, you remove yourself from the matter permanently. You don't touch it again. You don't ask about it. You don't get to know where it is. I wrote it in about 9 minutes. I printed it. I signed it. From Special Agent E. Callahan, VA Office of Inspector General, Criminal Investigations Division. Subject: recusal. File 134471. Relationship. To subject: brother. I carried it to my supervisor's desk. She read it. She looked at me for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Okay." And that was all. File 134471 left my desk and went into a queue. And it sat in that queue for 10 years. Not because of a conspiracy. Not because somebody buried it. Because there were 30,000 files in that queue and 32 investigators. And file 134471 was a guy in Illinois taking $40,100 a month. And there were people in that queue stealing $40 million. It wasn't buried. It just wasn't as important. 10 years. You're waiting for me to say I tried to push it, that I made calls, that I checked on it every year. I didn't. I wasn't allowed to. But that isn't the reason. The real reason is something else. My father died in 2019. Stood up from the breakfast table, said, "Huh," and went down. 71 years old. He'd been retired 11 months. At the funeral, Daniel wore the vest. He stood at the back of the room and people lined up to shake his hand, and the old men from the Cranfield VF went to him first, before they went to my mother, because that's how it works. That's how it always worked. I wore a black dress from Kohl's and I stood by the casket and people asked what I did and I said, "I work for the government." And they nodded and moved on. I could have destroyed him right there, in 10 seconds, in front of the whole town. I didn't. Not because I'm noble. Because my mother was in the front row and she had just lost her husband. I wasn't going to take that from her on the day we buried my father. So I waited. I told myself I was waiting. My mother died in 2024, lung cancer. She never smoked a cigarette in her life. Sometimes it's just like that. She was in hospice in Springfield for 11 days. Daniel came on day 1 and day 11. I was there all 11. I slept in the worn green chair in the corner. Day 9, around 4 in the morning, she woke up. She hadn't said anything clear in about 2 days, but she was lucid. She found my hand, and she said, "Your brother saw things, Emmy." I sat still. "You just did paperwork. You got the lucky end. Be gentle with him." The IV pump was ticking. Somebody rolled a cart down the hall outside. I had the truth sitting in my mouth. It was right there. It was as heavy as a stone. I could have said, "Mom, he never left the state of Georgia." I could have said, "Mom, he bought that vest at a gun show." I could have said, "Mom, the things he saw are the things I saw and he read them off the back of Dad's postcards." And my mother would have died 2 days later knowing that 20 years of stories she'd told at church were fiction, and that the daughter she'd just called Lucky had known it for 9 years and let her keep telling them. I said, "Yes, ma'am." I squeezed her hand. She went back to sleep. She died on day 11 at 9:20 in the morning, and Daniel got there at 10, and he cried, and I believe he cried for real. People asked me why I said nothing for 11 years. That's why. Not fear. Not strategy. My brother thought I stayed quiet because I didn't dare. I stayed quiet because my mother was still breathing. If you have ever known a truth that would destroy someone who didn't deserve to be destroyed, and you swallowed it, and you carried it for years, and they died without ever knowing, then I need you to do something for me. Comment below with 4 words. I stayed quiet too. You don't have to explain. You don't have to tell the story. I just want to count us. October of 2025, Del Prokop retired. And on his last day of work after 31 years, he took the elevator up to the 4th floor instead of out to the parking lot, and he knocked on the door of the Inspector General's office. And he sat down and he said, "I need to tell you about a file from 2013. Nobody made him. Nobody was investigating him. He could have walked to his car with a full pension and never thought about it again." Del Prokop had carried that file for 12 years, and he did not want to carry it into old age. File 134471 was reopened on October 23rd. It was assigned to an agent named Nadia Sokolov, whose face I knew, who sat 2 rows away from me, and who by regulation was never allowed to say one word to me about it. She didn't. I didn't know, but Daniel did. Not the details. Just a letter. That's how it starts. Not handcuffs. Not a knock. A white Department of Veterans Affairs envelope, standard size with the line showing through the window, notice of benefit Revi. It's a completely routine form. The VA sends thousands a year. 99% of them are procedural. But if you're the other 1%, if you've been sitting for 13 years waiting for that exact envelope, then it isn't a form. It's a knock. My brother held that letter in his hands in his kitchen in Cranfield, Illinois on an afternoon in November, and he did the arithmetic he'd done 1,000 times in his head. 13 years, $4,100 a month, $640,000. That's what he owed. Not a fine, not damages, just repayment. The money he'd taken that he wasn't allowed to take. And he knew the thing a lot of people learn too late. If you pay it back before they charge you, sometimes you don't go to prison. He had $11,000 in savings. He called me on January 17th. We met at the Hardee's on Route 4, just outside Cranfield. It smelled like fryer oil, syrup, and air conditioning that had been running too long. He looked bad. That's the first thing I remember. Not movie gaunt. Just deflated, like a pillow taken out of its case. He wasn't wearing the vest. It was the only time in 13 years I'd seen him in public without it, and I knew exactly what this conversation was going to be about before he opened his mouth. He talked around it for 20 minutes. Business investment. Opportunity. Julie. The kid. Then he said the number. 640,000. I stirred my coffee. I didn't say anything. And then my brother did the thing I never thought he'd do. He gave up. You know, he said. Not a question. Yeah, I said. How long? 11 years. He looked at me, and something went across his face that I still haven't been able to name. It wasn't fear. It was closer to insult. 11 years, he said. Yeah. You let me go to church. You let me stand on that football field. You let me carry Dad's casket in that vest. Yeah. Why? And I couldn't say it. Because the answer was because of Mom, and saying that out loud in a Hardee's would have killed something in both of us. So I said the other part, the part that was true in a different way. I can't give you the money, Dan. You've got 1.4. I know what I've got. So then, listen to me. I put the spoon down. I'm not saying no because I hate you. I'm saying no because the second that money moves, I stop being your sister. I become an accessory. I'm a federal agent wiring $640,000 to conceal a federal crime I've known about for 11 years. I go to prison with you, and from in there I can't help you with anything at all. He sat there a long time. Then I said the thing I'd been rehearsing the whole drive over. Withdraw the claim. Turn yourself in. Plead before they come. Hire a real lawyer, not Jill Ferraro. You'll lose everything. But maybe you don't do time. I took a breath. And I won't say a word. Not ever. I've gone 11 years already. I can go 30 more. That was the way out. I'd put it on the table between us next to the ketchup packets. My brother looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "You've always loved this, haven't you?" He stood up and walked out. He let me pay for the coffee. 19 days later, I was served. Petition for Ron appointment of emergency conservator. Petitioner, Daniel R. Callahan. He didn't need to steal my money. He just needed to be allowed to spend it. That was the whole mechanism. If the court declared me incapacitated and appointed him conservator of my estate, then $640,000 could leave my account completely legally with his signature, and I wouldn't even have to agree. He wasn't trying to rob me, he was trying to pay it back with my money and sleep that night. Attached to the petition was a sworn medical affidavit, 9 pages, signed by a psychiatrist named Peter Ashgrove. Dr. Ashgrove had never met me. Not over Zoom. Not on the phone. Not for 1 minute. Here's the order it collapsed in. Day 1. I was served in the federal building parking lot at 7:40 in the morning by a man who was eating a burrito in his car while he waited. Day 3. Security called me up. There was a public court record saying I was severely delusional. I held a clearance. That's not an allegation they're permitted to ignore. Nobody yelled at me. Nobody called me a liar. That's the part nobody tells you about. It's very polite. A woman I'd had lunch with dozens of times said, I'm so sorry. I need the badge. I put it on the desk. It didn't make a sound. It just sat there. Paid administrative leave, pending resolution. That's what they call it. It sounds generous until you realize it means you can't come into the building anymore. Day 11. The judge issued a temporary freeze on my assets pending the hearing. My banking app showed a gray banner. Not red, gray. ACC counted a restrict. Please, contact your branch. $1.4 million. 8 years in the Army, 13 years of federal salary, no house, no husband, no kids, no vacations. I didn't have that money because I was smart. I had it because I had nothing else to spend it on. Day 14. I left my apartment in Springfield and drove the 20 miles up to Cranfield. The house was still ours. We hadn't been able to sell it. It had been on the market 2 years. I opened the door and it smelled like dust and pine and the lava soap in the kitchen drawer. I slept on the living room floor in a sleeping bag in the house I grew up in at 39 years old, accused of being insane with no job, no money, and no permission to tell anyone why. Day 22, Del Prokop called me. I don't know how he found my number. Cranfield is a small town and he lived in Rochester, 40 minutes away, and maybe that was enough. He said, "Miss Callahan, I've got something you need to see." We met at the Wagon Wheel out on Route 29, 4 in the afternoon, between lunch and dinner, when it's empty. Del Prokop was 66, and he looked like every old man in every diner in Illinois. Windbreaker. Bifocals. Big hands. He set a manila envelope on the table between us. He kept his hand on it. "I'm the one who approved your brother's claim," he said. 2013. I know who you are." He stopped. "Then you know what I did." "Yes. This is the original packet." He tapped the envelope. All of it. The supporting documents he submitted. "Miss Callahan, in here there are Mr. Prokop. There are postcards. From your father. Mr. Prokop." He went quiet. And I sat there, in the wagon wheel, 18 inches from that envelope. And I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than anything in Diala. And I'm telling you that seriously. I'm not allowed to look at that. He looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't understand. This is evidence. They're taking you to court. This is. Mr. Prokop, File 134471 is an open federal criminal case. I recused myself from it in 2015. If I touch that envelope, I'm a recused investigator handling evidence in her own relative's case." He still didn't get it. So I told him the part that actually mattered, and tomorrow his lawyer files a motion to dismiss the entire criminal case because the evidence is tainted. And he wins. And he walks out of there, and nothing ever happens to him again, ever. Silence. "If I pick up that envelope," I said, "I save myself and I let him go." Del Prokop sat there with his hand on the envelope, and I watched him understand. "So what do?" he asked. "I walk out of here. And they declare you incompetent. Maybe. And you're just going to let them." I stood up. I pulled my jacket down. "Mr. Prokop, take that to Special Agent Sokolov. She's on 4. Don't tell her you met me." I went to the register and paid for his coffee, $1.15. And I went out to the parking lot and I sat in my car for 15 minutes without starting it. I had it. It was right there, on the table. 18 inches from my hand. And I walked out. People ask me what part of the service followed me home. They think they're asking about Iraq. It's not Iraq. It's this. It's the part where you get trained to do the right thing even when the right thing makes you lose, especially when it makes you lose. If a rule only applies when it's working in your favor, it isn't a rule, it's a preference. I went home and slept on the floor. The hearing was 6 weeks out. My lawyer's name was Ruth Bellamy. Her office was in the basement of VFW Post 755, under the function hall next to the closet where they keep the folding chairs. It smelled like old beer, damp carpet, and cigarette smoke that had been in the walls since the 80s. Ruth was 68. She was a retired JAG colonel, 26 years in the Army, And now she did veterans benefits appeals, mostly for free, and she smoked outside the fire exit. She was not a bulldog. She didn't pound the table. She didn't tell me we were going to crush them. She read my file for 40 minutes and then she said, "I've done 40 of these. And you're the first one who is telling the truth." She put out the cigarette. "Out of those 40, you know how many were actually being set up by their families? 4. 4 people. The other 36 genuinely needed a conservator. And they sat in the chair you're sitting in, and they told me exactly what you just told me." She looked at me. "Exactly what you just told me. That's why this is hard. Not because they're strong. Because you sound just like the other ones." Ruth did one thing in the entire preparation. 1. She sent a discovery request to Dr. Ashgrove. 1 sentence. "Produce all materials relied upon in forming your affidavit." It's the most basic procedure in American civil law. If an expert gives an opinion, the other side gets to see what he read. Ashgrove produced a packet of 160 pages. In the middle of that packet, pages 41 through 112, was something Gil Ferraro had never read, because Daniel told him it was family psychiatric history. It was the disability claim file of Daniel Ray Callahan, submitted in 2013. My brother handed his own criminal file to his own lawyer, who handed it to his own doctor, who handed it to my lawyer, through the mail, with a receipt. July 14th. Courtroom 2. Judge Emmett Barrow, 61. He's the kind of judge you never see in a movie because he's bored. He'd been doing this 19 years. He didn't like speeches. He looked at the clock. He was not going to save me. There is no moment where Judge Barrow bangs a gavel and declares something magnificent. He just sat there and did his job, carefully, and that turned out to be more than enough. Ferraro called Dr. Ashgrove to the stand. Ashgrove was in his 60s, wore a bow tie, and had the voice of a man who reads the weather on a WEN radio. He read his affidavit. He used words like ideation and fixed and disconnection from consensus reality. Then he read paragraph 6. The patient exhibits intrusive recall of a convoy ambush near Bakeba, Diyala Province on March 14, 2007. These recollections are almost certainly confabulated, as the patient's service record indicates administrative duties. Ruth Bellamy, sitting next to me, hadn't written anything in 20 minutes. When Ashgrove read the words March 14th, she picked up her pen. "Dr. Ashgrove, how long did you evaluate my client?" This was a records-based assessment, a widely accepted methodology when, "How long, doctor?" I didn't meet with her. Ruth let that sit for about 3 seconds. "You have never met the person you're declaring legally incapacitated." I reviewed a substantial body of documentation provided by whom? By the family. By the petitioner. Ashgrove adjusted his bow tie. Ruth walked back to the table. She picked up a sheet of paper. And then she did the thing nobody in that courtroom was ready for. She asked me a question. "Miss Callahan, please stand and state your occupation for the court." I stood up. And I said, "Your Honor, I'm not permitted to answer that in open court. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when 30 people realize at the same moment that they've gotten something wrong." Judge Barrow looked up from his paper for the first time in 20 minutes. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I can answer in chambers, Your Honor. Not here." Gil Ferraro looked at his client. And that exact second is when Gil Ferraro knew that my brother had lied to him. I watched it happen. It was like watching air leave something. We were in chambers 11 minutes. I'm not going to tell you what was said in there. Not for drama. Because I genuinely am not allowed to. When we came back out, Judge Barrow didn't say anything. His demeanor didn't change. He just sat down and said, "Miss Bellamy, proceed." But he didn't look at the clock again. Ruth submitted a document. 1 page. She handed it to the clerk and asked that it be read into the record. The clerk that day was a man of about 40 named Marlin, and he had a head cold. He'd been sniffing all morning. It's the detail I remember most clearly about that day, and I don't know why. Marlin sniffed once, picked up the paper and read it in the flat voice of a man reading a form. From Special Agent E. Callahan, Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Inspector General, Criminal Investigations Division. Subject, recusal. File 134471. Relationship to subject, brother. Date, April 22nd, 2015. He put the paper down and sniffed again. One sentence. It told the room 5 things at once. That I was a federal agent, that my specialty was precisely this crime, that there was a file, that the file had a number, meaning it was real, it existed, it was open, and that I had known since 2015 and had walked out of it under my own power. Julie Callahan, in the front row, turned around and looked at her husband. It was the first time in the entire hearing she'd done that. Ruth turned on the projector. The fan spun up and started running. Your Honor, Petitioner's Exhibit 7, a photocopy of a postcard the petitioner represents that he received in Iraq. The card came up. The Cranfield Water Tower. And this is the original. She laid the real card on the glass. Color. 39 cents. Curled at the corner. I direct the court to the postmark. APO-AE 09392. That's a military zip code. It appears on mail sent to a combat zone. Not on mail sent from one. She paused. That's the only postmark the petitioner needed. He didn't forge anything. The United States Postal Service stamped it for him in 2007. Then she did the simplest thing in the world. She put the 2 of them side by side. Original left. 3 lines of address. Sergeant E. Callahan. FOB Warhorse. A PO-AE 09392. Photocopy. Right. Same card. Same postmark. Same right-leaning handwriting of my father's. And where those 3 lines should have been. A white rectangle. 47, Ruth said. The petitioner submitted 47. We've matched each one against the original in my client's possession. She looked up. 47 times he whited out his sister's name. I looked at Daniel. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the table. And I knew exactly what he was seeing because I was seeing it too. A 31-year-old man sitting at a kitchen table in Cranfield, Illinois one evening in 2013, with a bottle of correction fluid and 47 of his father's postcards doing it one at a time. He had to wait for it to dry. Correction fluid takes about a minute. 47 times. He had time to stop. 47 times he had a full minute to stop. One more thing, Your Honor, Ruth said. She put up page 47 of the Ash Grove packet. The 2013 disability claim. Daniel's own statement. Dote, convoy ambush March 14, 2007, near Bakaba. Then she put up Ashgrove's affidavit, paragraph 6. Intrusive recall of a convoy ambush near Bakba, Diyala province on March 14, 2007. Same date, same place, almost the same sentence. Dr. Ashgrove did not evaluate my client, Ruth said. He copied the petitioner's file and changed the name. Then she put up the 3rd one. My orders. Sergeant Callahan landed in Iraq on June 11, 2007. On March 14, 2007, she was at Fort Stewart, Georgia. There are 300 witnesses and a duty roster. Ruth set her pen down. Her brother took 11 real months out of her life and made them his. But he had to invent one day, because he needed a specific detail to make the file look true, and he picked a day before she got there. That's the only day in this entire file that isn't hers, and it's the day Dr. Ashgrove declared her delusional. Then Ruth asked that the respondent's final exhibit be read into the record. Judge Barrow nodded. Marlin sniffed, picked up the paper and read. Form D-214, Certificate of Release or Discharge from Active Duty. Callahan, Daniel Ray. Sniff. Date of entry, May 18, 2004. Date of separation, June 27, 2004. Sniff. Total active service, 0 years, 0 months, 41 days. Sniff. Julie was holding her purse in her lap. Her hands opened. The purse hit the wood floor and everything in it rolled out. A wallet, a set of keys, a tin of breath mints that popped open and scattered across the center aisle. Nobody picked it up. It sat there for the rest of the hearing, and Marlin kept reading. Character of service. Uncharacterized. Separation code. JFY. Reason. Entry-level performance and conduct. Sniff. Campaigns. None. Decorations and awards. None. Foreign service. None. He put the paper down. Nobody said anything. My father used to say he didn't care what you did for a living. He cared whether you could say your own name without swallowing first. My brother's name was read out loud in that courtroom by a clerk with a head cold, and my brother couldn't lift his head. The back door of the courtroom opened at 11:19. I heard it before I saw it. That door's hinge squeaks. Nobody's fixed it in years. 2 men. Gray suits. Not hurrying. They didn't burst in. They didn't shout anything. They came down the center aisle at the speed of men walking into a post office. I didn't know who they were. I want you to hear that again, because it's the whole point of this. I didn't know who they were. I'd recused myself 11 years earlier. Agent Sokolov never said one word to me. She wasn't allowed to. She didn't. I sat at that table and I was exactly as surprised as my brother was. I didn't get that moment. I didn't pull the trigger. I didn't get the pleasure of watching it come from a distance and knowing. I just sat there and watched the truth show up 11 years late, on its own schedule, without asking my permission. People ask me how they knew where to find him. The answer makes me sick every time I say it. File 134471 was ready in June. The warrant was signed on July 9th. They just needed to know where he'd be. My brother had filed a civil petition in state court. It was on the public electronic docket. Anybody can look at it. It had his name, his home address, his lawyer's phone number, and a hearing schedule. July 14th, 9 a.m., Courtroom 2, Sangamon County Circuit Court. He posted his own itinerary on the internet trying to have me declared insane. They just had to print it out. He didn't resist. He stood up when they got to him. He put his hands out in front of him, and one of them said, "Pretty kindly, actually. Behind your back, sir." The cuffs made a sound, not the sharp crack you hear in movies. 3 small clicks. Like a bike lock. Julie stood up. She didn't scream. She just stood, as though standing would help. Judge Barrow racked the gavel once and said, "Petition denied. We're adjourned." He didn't say anything else. He got up and went out the back door and went to lunch. I liked him for that. They stopped in the hallway outside. There's paperwork. There's always paperwork. That hallway smelled like lemon floor cleaner and rain. The fluorescents buzzed. There was a vending machine at the end of it humming. I should have walked straight out. I know that. I stopped. My brother stood there with his hands behind his back, between 2 men who were looking at their phones. He looked at me, and he said, 41 days. I didn't say anything. You know what they gave me? A bus ticket, and the clothes I came in. He swallowed. Dad picked me up at the station. He drove me home. I knew that road. I knew that seat. I knew the smell of the cloth and the cold coffee in the thermos. 2 hours, he said. He didn't say one word to me. 2 hours in that truck. Not one word. He looked at me. You know what he said when we got home? He said, "Go take a shower." And he laughed once. There was nothing in it. So don't stand there looking at me like that, Emmy. You and me grew up in the same house. I had it right there, in my mouth. Heavy and round, and it had been sitting there for 21 years. I could have said, "No, Dan, not the same house." 15 months later, he drove me to the bus station in that exact truck, and he shut the engine off. And he told me he didn't care what I did for a living. He cared whether I could say my own name without swallowing first. He talked to me, Dan. In that truck. One time. It was there. I could feel the shape of it. And then, standing in that hallway that smelled like lemon floor cleaner, I saw the rest of it. Dad didn't say anything to me either. 8 years. 2 deployments. And he handed me a beer. Dad wasn't silent at my brother. Dad was just silent. He had built 13 years of his life on a man's personality and called it rejection. And the one sentence my father ever said out loud, it landed on me because I was in that truck on a September afternoon and he was in it on a June evening. That's luck. That's the cruelest thing anyone could ever have said to my brother, not because it takes a father away from him, because it takes away the reason. I opened my mouth, and I swallowed it. I said, "Take care of yourself, Dan," and I walked out. It was still raining when I got outside. It had been raining all morning and nobody in that room had noticed. I didn't open an umbrella. I stood on the steps of the Sangamon County Courthouse for a while and let it come down on me. In 2004, the rain rotted the flags in my front yard. 3 weeks. Nobody took them down. The rain did it by itself. Rain doesn't take sides. It just doesn't stop. My brother had 13 years. That's a very long time to stand out in the rain and believe you're dry. Here's what happened after. I'll go fast, because it isn't as good as you think. Daniel pled to 2 counts, false statements to obtain benefits, and mail fraud. 42 months, federal, Terre Haute. $640,000 in restitution, which will follow him out the gate and follow him the rest of his life. He'll never pay it off. They know that when they order it, it isn't there to collect money. It's an anchor. He gets out in April of 2030. He'll be 47. People keep asking me what I'm going to do. They think I've decided. I haven't. Dr. Ashgrove, and this is the part I need you to hear, because this is the real part, nothing happened to him. The Illinois Medical Board sent him a letter of reprimand and fined him $2,500. He still practices. He still does evaluations. You could book an appointment with him next week. I know you want me to tell you he lost everything. He lost nothing. That's how it usually goes, and I'm not going to lie to you about it just to make you feel better. Gil Ferraro withdrew from the case 2 days after the hearing. He sent me a handwritten letter. I still have it. He isn't a bad man. He believed his client, same as everyone else. Julie filed for divorce in September. She kept the name Callahan because her daughter has it. She works at the Cranfield Public Library now, and she checks out books to people who know every day, 5 days a week. She's never spoken to me again. I don't blame her. She lost 13 years of her life in that same courtroom, and she didn't do anything wrong, and nobody is paying her back for any of it. Del Prokop kept his pension. He didn't want it. He tried to give it back, and they told him the system has no mechanism for that. He sends me a card once a year, in November. Not Christmas. November, the month my brother filed. They're postcards. I don't think he knows. I think it's just what men of that generation send. And me. I got the badge back in October. The clearance was reinstated in December. The freeze came off, and $1.4 million sat exactly where it had been sitting. I left the Criminal Investigations Division in March. I didn't start a foundation. I didn't buy anything. I requested a transfer to a position at the Claims Processing Center, and now I sit in a cubicle and I adjudicate disability claims. That's Del Prokop's job. Literally. I sit at that desk. People ask why I'd give up a badge for a desk like that, and they say it the way you'd describe it to motion. I tell them this. There was a man who sat at this desk in 2013. He had 400 files a month and a supervisor with a whiteboard. He was in a hurry once, 4 minutes instead of 40. And those 4 minutes cost 13 years, a funeral, a marriage, and 42 months of my brother's life to undo. I'm not in a hurry. I read all of it. Every page. I don't care what the whiteboard says. There's one last thing. I paid off the mortgage on Julie's house. November of last year. Through a law firm, anonymously. She thinks it was some kind of relief program. She'll never know. Don't turn that into something it isn't. I didn't do it for Julie. I barely know her. I did it because there's a 6-year-old with the last name Callahan asleep in that room, and because my father would never have forgiven me for sitting on $1.4 million and letting that house get taken. I'm 39 years old, and I'm still taking orders from a man who's been dead 7 years. I'm fine with that. 47 postcards sit in a shoebox in my bedroom closet. I took them out one time. After the hearing, I laid them out on the living room floor of the old house, and I read all of them in order for the first time in 18 years. 47 cards about the weather, about the pump on Tank 3, about the price of gas, about the Cardinals. Not one word in any of them says I miss you. My father didn't know how to say that. He would have died before he could say that. So he walked down to the Casey's on Route 4, once a week, for 15 months, and spun that squeaky postcard rack, and paid 39 cents, and wrote me the weather report. 47 times. My brother read every one of them, and the only thing he saw was the postmark. Last November I wrote back to Del Prokop. First time in 3 years. I sat and looked at the blank card for 40 minutes. I'm not a letter writer. I guess that's genetic. So I wrote this. Rained 4 days straight. That coffee ring is still on the corner of your desk. I'm not wiping it off. Gas is $3.29. EC. I drove down to the Cranfield post office and bought a stamp and dropped it in the box. He didn't write back. He didn't need to. People ask me what took my brother down. They want to hear about the file, about the agents, about March 14th. It wasn't any of that. What took him down was 13 years of having to remember what he'd said to who. I only ever had to remember one thing. The truth is cheap. It doesn't need maintenance. The truth doesn't rot in silence. It just waits, intact, until the day somebody opens the drawer. My father said he didn't care what I did for a living. He cared whether I could say my own name without swallowing first. Dad, I can. I swallowed exactly once in my life. And I swallowed it for him. I'm not going to ask you to hit like if this story made you feel good. It shouldn't make you feel good. Nobody in it won. But if you came all the way here with me, then do one thing for me, and it isn't for me. Comment below with the name of one person who deserved better than they got. Just the name. You don't have to explain. Because my town stood on a football field and applauded the wrong one for 13 years, and the right one was standing in the back row in a black dress from Kohl's, and nobody turned around. Say their name. Somebody should.